I love that intro. It turns me on. But you know, I confess, I am a man of many vices. Red wine, coffee, potato chips, but worst of all, Law and Order reruns, especially in the middle of the night. But you know, I'm not alone, am I? Millions of people all across the world are hooked and addicted to Law and Order. Law and Order, prime time. The first original show was on primetime TV for 23 straight years. Now, I am also a writer of what people call creative nonfiction. Creative nonfiction is the fastest growing genre in the publishing industry and in the literary world. Scientists, engineers, doctors, and everyday people use creative nonfiction writing techniques to produce best-selling books and powerful, compelling essays and articles. Creative nonfiction means true stories well told. It means communicating sometimes very difficult, complicated information to the general public through story, through narrative. And this is becoming so incredibly important these days because the world is suddenly so complicated. Cosmology, robotics, genetics, it's crazy what we have to learn. And the people who are creating this technology are sometimes rather unable or, in fact, unwilling to try to communicate to us, the real people who are impacted by the amazing things that they do. Writing, teaching, editing, publishing creative nonfiction has been my mission in life for years. But wait a minute. What does this all have to do with Law and Order reruns? And what is this yellow test? Is this some sort of forensic technique? Well, maybe. But first, let's take a look at Law and Order. Why is it so successful? How does it work? Well, for one thing, it begins with a scene. There's a policeman eating a donut. There's a woman walking her dog. Suddenly, something happens, a big problem. Shots are fired. A body is discovered. Then what happens? What happens? The veteran detectives, the two detectives, Briscoe and Logan, they come upon the scene, right? They look around the area. They interview bystanders. And then what happens? Invariably, near the end of the sequence, the veteran detective, Lenny Briscoe, he looks at the camera and he has some sort of clever and caustic remark to make, right? Yeah, but then what happens after that? You know what happens after that, don't you? Yes! Woo! Then come commercials, right? Lots of commercials. And then the story begins and there's another scene. Now we're back at headquarters and the detectives are caucusing with their lieutenant, Anita Van Buren. They decide upon the suspect. And what do? They arrest him, right? Then what happens? Commercials. More commercials, right? But look, don't you see some sort of a pattern here? Look what's happening here. First there's a scene, then there's a commercial, then there's a scene, then there's a commercial. Scene, commercial, scene, commercial. That's kind of the TV rhythm. And we creative nonfiction writers, well, we do almost the same thing. Our terminology is a little bit different. First there's a story, and then we provide some information that readers may not want to really learn, but we force them to learn because we suck them in with the story, right? Then there's more story, then there's information. It's either a continuation of the first story or a new story. So it's that kind of nonfiction, creative nonfiction dance I'll be talking with you about today. But you know, the sponsors, the people who pay for all these commercials, they understand how important the story problem idea is. So some of the most successful commercials begin with a story and a problem, like, for example, a bunch of young parents contemplating the responsibilities of their future.
So has anybody actually started saving for college yet?
Oh, not me.
No, you got time.
Oh, no, we actually started.
Yeah, but how did you even know where to start?
Oh, I found out about the Gerber Life College plan.
So story with a problem. It touches your heart. But then information.
Call now and get started with free information on the Gerber Life College plan.
Oh, it's a life insurance policy, too.
Oh, that's different.
Now, any good story has to have an ending, right? And we have to kind of nudge our viewers or our readers to kind of take some sort of an action.
We've got to get started.
Now, here is another story problem commercial that is older and more recognizable than the original Law and Order. It's been part of our culture for such a long time. It starts with an incredibly dramatic, but I gotta admit, maybe a little campy beginning story scene.
I've fallen, and I can't get up.
We're sending help immediately, Mrs. Fletcher.
Now, information and action, and look at all these scenes, by the way.
Recently, when I became deathly ill, I was able to summon an ambulance, my next-door neighbor, my family, and my doctor without picking up a telephone. I used this remote control to contact Life Call, my 24-hour emergency medical response service.
Now, even the largest corporations worried about branding are understanding the power and the importance of story. Coca-Cola now has a total website with four full-time employees devoted to gathering, writing, editing, and publishing stories favorable to their product. And look, there's not a politician in the United States that doesn't have some sort of a narrative. To be elected to office, you gotta have a narrative. This guy probably would not be president of the United States if it wasn't for the fact that he created his own memoir, his own narrative long before he became a public figure. Look, we all know, all down through history, that everybody all over the world are kind of obsessed with story. We're sucked in, we're excited, we're drawn in by story. We're obsessed by story. The brain is wired by story. Now, in 1945, a professor at the University of Kansas showed this black and white video to a bunch of his grad students and asked the students to write down what they saw. 95% of the students saw the two triangles as men vying for attention of the circle who was the woman. They saw the small triangle and the circle having something in common. They were both innocent young things, whereas the bigger triangle was a brutal, enraged, frustrated bully. Only one student of the 43 students got it right as far as the professor was concerned, a bunch of geometric figures running across a screen. Now, since that time, there has been tons of research about the power and the effectiveness of story. The fact of the matter is that people remember more facts for a longer period of time when those facts, that information is communicated in or with a story. And people are more easily persuaded when ideas and concepts are communicated in a story. And look, I really mean in a story. Law and Order, Special Victims Unit, proved that fact not too long ago in an episode about HPV, human papillomavirus. Before and after survey of viewers was taken, and it turns out that after 1 week, three times as many viewers could define HPV and explain its connection to cervical cancer than before, 1 week later. And 6 weeks later, the results pretty much held up. Now, it is easier to do, in many respects, what Law and Order does, and that is the facts are true, the facts are accurate, but they make up the stories. In creative nonfiction, if you really want to connect to your readers, and come on, why do we write? Why do we try to communicate if it isn't the readers we're trying to impact? We're not writing to make money, we're not writing for glory, we're writing to make a connection. And so the best way to make a connection is to make certain that not only are our stories good and enticing, but they got to be true. So this is the challenge. And I gotta say, right here, I can't exactly tell you how to do this, but I can tell you how to know that you're on your way to doing it correctly, okay? So sit down, start to write, produce a manuscript, and I am introducing you now to the creative nonfiction writer's most useful tool, the yellow magic marker. Like college, except instead of underlining the important stuff, what I'm asking you to do is to sit down, think about this pattern of information and story, and then yellow in, after you're all finished, you have a nice manuscript, yellow in the scenes, just like this. And if you're on your way, if you're moving forward, if you're making progress with the story information rhythm, then that paper, that manuscript should be blaring and glaring back at you in yellow. Now, if you took a look at your entire essay, okay, your entire article on essay, and you kind of wanted to see if it's working, if this pattern is working, first there's some yellow, it's a scene, it's a story, drives the reader in. And then the reader's excited, the reader wants to know, and then you give the reader some information, and before they get bored and go buy a pizza, you continue your story, okay? So it's the rhythm. It's our creative nonfiction jazz, you know? Scene, story, and then story, more story, and scene and story all the way through story information. And then our first major finesse, to keep our readers, to further educate our readers, to make sure they're learning as they're being entertained, you try as hard as possible to embed information inside of every scene as well. Keep giving them the stuff that they don't necessarily want to know, so that, and keep them engaged by the stuff they really do want to know. Now, here is the first paragraph, plus one sentence, of an award-winning, best-selling creative nonfiction book, Wild, by Cheryl Strayed. There's a big movie out, Wild, now, but this book has been on the bestseller list for over 2 years, and it starts with Cheryl talking about her 5-month solo trek across the Pacific Coast Trail. And she stops to rest on her 38th day, and she's tired, and she takes off her boots, and suddenly, oh my God, suddenly she knocks one of her boots over a side of a cliff, and it catapults thousands of feet to the ground. And she writes in the first sentence of her second paragraph of the entire book, "My boot was gone, actually gone." Now here is the first sentence of a book that's been on the bestseller list, creative nonfiction book, since 2005. The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls. Look at this really terrific sentence. "I was sitting in a taxi, wondering if I had overdressed for the evening when I looked out the window and I saw Mom rooting through a dumpster." It really kind of gets you going. A lot of action, a little intrigue. But wait a minute. Listen. Readers will not know what happened to Cheryl's feet, what happened to her boots, how she makes it without boots all across the Pacific Coast Trail. Readers will not know till halfway through the book. And even more important and more interesting is readers will not know why Mom is rooting through the dumpster, why her daughter is watching her from a taxi and not going to her aid until the end of the book. Because both authors do what many of us do. They start their work close to the peak of the action, and then they move back in time, okay? You get a story going, you get your readers really interested and excited, and here's the thing you don't do. You don't tell your readers what they want to know. You tell your readers what they want to know, and they're going to go somewhere else. Start right before the peak of the action and move back in time. A finesse. Here is another finesse, another way to do things. "I went to see Carrie a week after her accident. Her shoulder had been broken, the bone shattered, and 24 stitches were needed to sew the cuts on her face. Her arm was in a sling, her feet were propped on a pillow, a bottle of Vicodin was on a table within easy reach." Okay, starts the scene, okay? And then information. Information about her bike crash and information more about where she is traveling to. Third paragraph. Suddenly, her wheels lost traction on the wet, slippery surface, and she felt the bike slip out from under her as she flew off the seat. And when she stood up, her face was bleeding profusely and her shoulder throbbed with pain. Now, here is the key transition. If Carrie were writing about this experience, that incident, when she hit the ground and bounced up, shaken and bleeding, could be her first scene. So this really isn't about the bike accident. This is a story that leads to another story. We call this a parallel narrative. We know maybe that our readers aren't going to be turned on by learning about scenes, about learning about the yellow test, so we start with something else, a finesse. Okay, now I have to confess to you. I have tried in this presentation to finesse you. I have tried to talk about law and order and my obsession for it, knowing that all of you out there, or many of you, will understand law and order and be obsessed with me. Something really familiar, a real story that we can share. Because remember, I am dealing with my readers and my viewers. I want you to listen to me. So I used law and order, and then I tried to tie it in with the writer's tool, the yellow magic marker. Now, one final scene. And this scene has you as the star of the show. Just picture this. You've listened to everything I have asked you to do, and you have an assignment to write something that's really important, but you're blocked. This is hard. Writing is such hard work. You don't know what to do. So there you are. You're stuck with your cigar, your typewriter. It's the middle of the night. What do? Here's what you do. Here is the Law and Order Creative Nonfiction Writer's Prompt. Middle of the night, you stand up. You walk into the living room. You sit down in a chair. You reach over. You turn on the television. And you wait for the inspiring moment. That sound that will make you begin becoming creative and informative and effective. Are you ready? Yes. Listen. Thank you.